My name is Pascal, and I'm the host of One Degree Shifts, and I'm also the co-founder of Nectara, my beautiful wife, Elaine. And today we're talking to Erica Siegal from Nest Harm Reduction and Shine Support. Hi, Erica. How are you?
I'm great. Hi, Pascal. It's good to see you.
Likewise. I first heard about Erica about 3 years ago on LinkedIn, and I saw her profile and I saw the work she was doing, and I was like, I need to connect with her at some point. You've spent a whole lot of time working on harm reduction and supporting people at festivals and basically doing the front lines work around supporting people around their experiences, but also having seen, like you said in our last meeting, a whole bunch of stuff that people wouldn't imagine are, kind of out there in the psychedelic world, but they are. And so you've really dedicated a large part of your life to this work.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it kind of, seems silly and also incredibly meaningful, and working in recreational psychedelic spaces like music festivals and transformational events and things like that. It's amazing the amount of good work and transformation and healing that can be done in those spaces, and also really challenging work when things are not properly contained. And so to think that, I've been running around music festivals doing crisis response work for a decade, it kind of feels like yesterday, and also so happy to have all of the wisdom that I've gained from working in those spaces for so long.
Yeah, I have a ton of respect for what you're doing because, being on the front lines of that kind of work, it exposes you to a lot of very challenging situations. And you've seen the space change over time. I'm sure things have been expanding. And as more people are entering these experiences, and you've said it really well, there's a lot of beauty and a lot of positive things that do happen in the space. And yet there's this sort of shadowy side to this work that everyone is aware of in a way. But it's easy it can be difficult sometimes to look behind a curtain and actually see what is going on in the space right now. And you've been exposed to it for so long. What is happening in the space in terms of where are we at in terms of holding people well and creating safety and structures that help support that? A recent research said that 55% of people who recently left an ayahuasca ceremony were having mental and emotional and spiritual challenges for it. I think like 44% of people, or 39% of people, thought it was the most challenging experience of their whole life. And so, it is a very powerful, it can be a very powerful experience. And that powerful experience needs to be met with an equally well-structured and nourishing and supportive infrastructure after they leave the experience and before they enter it. So how have you seen the space evolve around that infrastructure that needs to be developed for this?
Well, it kind of feels like the train left the station, but we haven't finished the tracks yet. And so some of us are frantically on the other end of the track still, laying down railroad ties and trying to make sure that the impending psychedelic renaissance and consciousness expanding access is going to shift worldwide over the next decade. And whether that is to treat mental health or to have spiritual connection or to create repair and relationship with each other, I think that everybody's really hopeful. And also it's like the genuine definition of the wild, wild west. We're seeing inconsistent practice. We're seeing inconsistent financial compensation reimbursement packages. We're seeing a lot of inadvertent boundary crossing that kind of falls under manipulation and coercion, because we have a lot of people who have been trained to be facilitators who have blind spots, and there's no way for them to get the knowledge, expertise, experience. And so we're seeing a lot of facilitators like learn a lot of the same lessons over and over again. And one of the things that I've been working on is trying to come up with a cohesive way for us to compile all of this information so we can learn from each other's lessons instead of having everybody siloed and just repeating the same poor practice. And that's, just in poor facilitation, poor training, burnout stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into. But also, we are seeing some real predatory, intentional, malicious abuse and harm and assault in the space.
And that's part of why you created Shine Support as well. Can you tell us more about why you created it? And when I first heard about Shine and seeing the word psychedelic survivors, it really highlighted the level of harm that can happen from these experiences. Can you tell us more about why you created Shine and why it's so vital right now to support psychedelic survivors?
Oh, goodness. Thanks for phrasing it that way. It like warms my heart. Because I have done so much work in crisis response, I really have seen, the full spectrum of harm and abuse, everything including, hospitalization, sexual assault, domestic violence, like all of the, kind of criminal, including things like fraud, like financial fraud, misrepresenting credential fraud, things like that. That have some kind of fuzzy boundaries, especially in the psychedelic space, when nobody, there aren't regulatory boards right now that are regulating the space. So anybody can hang up a shingle that says, I'm a psychedelic facilitator. And what we're working towards is finding a way to have credentialing boards and regulatory boards without restricting access to people who have been working in the underground who might not have the medical or mental health credentials associated with that. But that's a segue. I will go back to the kind of harm and abuse that we're seeing in the space, and what motivated me to create Shine. Because of all of this field work, when something would go terribly wrong, my phone would ring, or I'd get an email, or I'd get a text message, or I'd get an article forwarded to me. Like, hey, what do you think about this? And I inadvertently became kind of one of the people. There are many people in this community who are working with survivors. One of the people that was kind of in a network of people who are supporting survivors starting to talk to each other. This also includes Sandra Dreisbach, who runs Epic, who I know you've done some, Nectar has done some work with her before. Catherine McLean and Leah Friedwoman, who started Psychedelic Survivors that then got, that shifted into Shine. And then seeing different organizations all over the world, in the UK, in Costa Rica, in Canada, all of these different kind of people who are working on these really interesting ethics cases, and what to do about them. And so I like to say that I got coerced and manipulated into starting a nonprofit about manipulation and coercion in the psychedelic space. By the community that was like, hey, you should do this, every time something would happen, every time an incident would happen. People in the community would pop up and be like, where do we support survivors? There wasn't an organization for people to go to. And so about a year ago, less than a year ago, we launched Shine, soft launch. And since then, I've spoken to about 75 different survivors, ranging from untested substances, poor facilitation, poor group dynamics, all the way to non-consensual sexual touch, financial manipulation, fraud, coercion, things like that. But I started seeing a commonality between all of the survivors, which to me was, significant to take note of. We're starting to collect some data on survivors. Jules Evans, who runs Challenging Psychedelic Experiences project, is on our advisory board. And so, we're creating all of these, like a mycelium network of people who are around working on safety and harm in this space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. And, like I said, I have so much respect for this kind of work, because I imagine it's not easy to be supporting in these kind of challenging thing, and really getting exposed to the full spectrum of what humanity is capable of, which, there's a dark and light, and that's part of it, but also it must be a lot for you to hold and for others. And thankfully you have community to support you on this project.
Yeah. I myself, during those crisis response years, exposed myself to a lot of vicarious trauma. And was experiencing some symptoms of burnout and moral injury. And really, I did have to take about 6 months off right before I founded Nest. I took about 6 months off from work and rested and reoriented myself. And I think that if you're going to be a psychedelic facilitator, you need to build in sabbatical. You need to be able to take time off. I kind of want to think of it as, the Army Reserves, like one week in a month, 2 weeks a year, and also then I'd love to say take a full year off every 7 years. But that is hard to do. So even if it's a 3-month sabbatical or 4-month sabbatical, I think times of integration and rest need to be modeled by psychedelic facilitators, for the people that we work with and for our greater communities.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good advice for the facilitators out there. Before we jump into some more specific topics around facilitators, since you've been in this space for so long and you're so involved in these organizations and projects and helping people, what are the top 3 things that you see in the space in general that needs to be addressed, or things that maybe are being addressed, but of course these things take time, like accountability, vetting of training programs, which I've seen training programs where people just go for a weekend, they get high for a weekend, they stack medicines, and then they come out like, I'm a facilitator. And, I have a friend who's, bless her heart, she's a lovely person. She's by trade a real estate agent. And I heard that she went through this weekend training and now she's serving medicine. And I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be doing that. And there's at least 100 different training programs out there. So I think, training programs are probably one of the top 3 things, but I'd love to hear from you that really quickly, the top 3 things that you think are the most important to work on, because there's a lot of infrastructure things to be built here.
Oh, yeah. In the greater top 3 things to work on in the greater psychedelic space, or top 3 things to work on if you're an individual wanting to get into?
That's probably 2 questions that we can talk about, because I think I'm interested in both.
Right. I think that, realistic, realistic caseload, I think is something that everyone needs to pay attention to. Number of clients you see a week, amount of money you think you're going to make, right? We can't see, I hear some people coming out of these training programs and they're like, I'll just see, 15, 20 CAP clients a week. And I'm like, no, you're not. And if that's what you're basing your budget off of, you're going to really be struggling. I think there's a combination of, what is ethical pricing and what is ethical income. And that looks different to everyone, based on environment and socioeconomic class and like a whole bunch of other things. Some people are like, I don't understand, you know, why somebody would want to make $1 million a year, like, or, you know, or how they could live off of $50,000 a year. And people are doing all of these things all the time, and everybody has different lifestyles. So no judgment there. But I think that across the board, there should be some industry standard pricing. And so that's one. Two, I would say, legality, right? There's a lot of people who are thinking that they're going to an Oregon service center, or that their mushroom facilitator has been trained in Oregon and now they're traveling around, but like, who actually knows? Because there's no lookup. And so, like, yeah. I think, you know, credentials, I think being able to like know who you are, authentically being able to present the work that you're doing, be able to provide tested drugs, information about drugs, know how to provide informed consent, all of that kind of stuff. But like knowing the legal risks of where you are, and legal ramifications of where you are as a facilitator and as a consumer, and as an investor. I hear a lot of people investing in the space into things that can't exist yet, and then things get delayed and things get delayed, and then the investors lose their money and the business people run away with it, or things collapse. Right. And so I know that was kind of like meshed the like financial, regulatory, like informed consent, basically good facilitator, informed consent and best practices. And so we don't have, we have different drafts siloed in different places. And so making sure that you are like being honest and authentic with the work that you're doing.
Right. And there's so many different pieces. Like you said, it's kind of building a railroad ahead of the train. And the other analogy is like building a spaceship while it's flying in the air. And there's a lot of different infrastructure things that I think more and more people are looking at in terms of creating structure. Like the Psychedelic Safety Institute is being created, and they're looking at, I know you've talked to them, and they're looking at more like the data and the research and gathering the important data around this, because no one, you know, has all the information in one place. And I think that's not allowing the space to really inform itself into like what we actually need to create to reduce harm and to elevate the standards of practice, basically. And I love that you talked about pricing, because just even for retreats and clinics, for example, like the sort of business model that goes into serving people is just, it goes against principles of care that I think are really supportive of people, because they need to make a lot of money to support their business expenses. And, you know, who's investing in those companies, you know, they also want a return, and there's also some financial things that get mixed up into things. And a lot of wide-eyed people out there looking to have their first experience. They're like, oh, it's $6,000 for a ceremony. Oh, that sounds fair. You know, I'm going to have a beautiful, life-changing experience. I'll pay it. But actually, you know, that's you know, it's a very high price to pay for that. And there's no standards around that. So it is a Wild West around that. And of course, when you bring in money into it, you get the facilitator's shadow side coming in terms of lack of abundance, or like the wounded healer, and maybe they have issues around money and challenges. And so it becomes a very charged space of service, because money is intertwined into everyone's life in a way that can be very challenging for them. So those are really good points. And I'd love to talk about some common blind spots that you've seen from facilitators. And I see you smile, so I'm sure you have seen a whole lot of different ones, and we can talk for hours about that. But the intention of that is really to you know, share some reflection points for the facilitators out there, and the teams that are working as well, in terms of what could be ways that they can improve their service via self-reflection and community support. And Dan came in, just gave a talk just this morning around narcissism and psychedelics and how that's intertwined in the role of the facilitator. And I can't wait to listen to it, but it was a 2-hour talk around just that topic. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear from you, like, what are the things that you've seen the most common blind spots that maybe people out there don't realize they have? And that's fine. It's not about being perfect. It's about continuous improvement, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that is really important when it comes to blind spots is this idea around intentionality, right? There is a shift in orientation when you go from I am here to serve you medicine to I am in service of your journey, right? There's like a power dynamic. Or I mean, and there's great ayahuasca facilitators that can hold down a space for 30 or 40 people, and they energetically are, holding that container. And I think that there's a little bit of this like ego, right? You're wielding power when you're facilitating psychedelics, regardless. Like, it's in the room. You're putting somebody into a suggestible, vulnerable, altered state. Like, how do we make sure that that person is cared for while in that state? And I like looking at things like the extra ethical care and boundaries for anesthesiologists and for pediatricians. Like, what happens when you're working with vulnerable population that can't consent? What are the guidelines there? And I think my background being in this, crisis response harm reduction space has really had me practice orienting myself to being of service to whatever happens to come in when we work in those spaces. And it's oftentimes not ideal, and we do the best we can. And so I think that there's more of this practice of like playing the hand that we're dealt, then like come into my space and my sanctuary and be here and I will facilitate for you. You have a lot more power in that space, and your ego exists a lot more in that space than when you're in the field. And so I think there is this little bit of training shift, right? Is like, because I've done so much like underground recreational field work, that when things go wrong, I have taught myself how not to freak out in most really weird situations. And people who have gone through whether it's a weekend long training or, a 2-year training, might not have the experience of knowing what to do with, excited delirium, or what happens when somebody is in a like fugue state and takes off all their clothes. Like, what happens and it's like, you don't get to see these when you're really in these programs in clinical practice. And that's why it's so risky for facilitators who don't have a ton of lived experience to be able to do this work. I like to say that, like 7 years of personal work before you can serve medicine with each individual medicine, and getting permission from that medicine to serve it. I think Absolutely. That's a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the US, especially around ketamine clinics, is a lot of people who don't know how to navigate the space are facilitating and leaving people dysregulated.
Yeah, and there's and I had a couple of friends of mine just this week actually who's been serving for over 10 years, and they had someone take off their clothes and just run off. And they had to call the police, and it was the first time they ever dealt with that, and they handled it very well because of their experience in presencing and apprenticeship and doing their own work for so long, that they were able to meet that extraordinary moment with a lot of compassion and professionalism. And when you talk about these, we talk about harm reduction and all these trainings and these things like that, and sort of the financial aspect coming into it. There's a sort of contrasting elements to this space, which is we want it to grow and we want it to be successful. We want to help more people, but there's a contradiction there because, like you said, I also believe that you should do 5, 6, 7 years of training and apprenticeship with one medicine, have teachers and things like that, and that takes time. And yet the space is here wanting to grow, and we have to train all these facilitators. How do you merge those two realities together? Because ultimately, I think we should be moving slower, not faster. Yet everyone wants to serve, everyone wants to open a retreat. There's all these businesses started. People want to heal. It's like this chasing element to it, which how do we navigate? How do we merge those two realities and actually do it better? Is it standards around years of experience? Like, how do you gate that so that those moments of harm are not being presented as often as they could be, because we've gated the ability to serve medicine in a way. And I don't know if that sounds like too rigid, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Oh,
it's a big question.
That is a big question.
Slow down the train.
I mean, right. I'm a big fan of slowing everything down. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't want to, like, if you're stretching the taffy, if you stretch it too fast, it's going to snap. And so you have to move certain things. You have to move slow. And what we're seeing is people rushing forward and snapping and rushing forward and, like, you know, and that is risky and that is harmful. And what we know is there's millions of people out there accessing psychedelics. If we put on too many criteria to access them, the people who don't meet criteria, who are super high risk or super high in crisis, will make the riskiest decision and go into the underground and go with unsafe facilitators. So there's this, like, careful balance between, like, making sure that we put guardrails on and also don't make those guardrails so restrictive that the people who need it the most won't be able to access it. And so it's really challenging to be able to slow it down, because the people who are the most desperate for access are going to break the door down anyway.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that is, you know, one of the biggest challenges. I think everybody should slow down, and I don't think that that's actually going to happen. And so we are going to harm people. Therefore, support psychedelic survivors, because we know that a certain percentage of people are for sure going to get harmed by this. And we, as people who have gotten the message from psychedelic work and have hung up the phone and started companies like this, it's our job to also build the infrastructure for the people who've been harmed.
Right. It is going to happen for sure. And that's
right. We need to do it better than the system's doing it. And this is kind of, you know, the basis of harm reduction work, which is, you know, grassroots community-based organizing.
And community is such a big part of all this, right? And I know you and Sandra talk a lot about community support and peers and, you know, doing it together. We don't have all the answers. And I think that's very supportive. No one does have all the answers. And Geronimo from ICE here, my last podcast was with him, and he brought a good point, which is, like, this is a new space, and you know, it's normal that we're still struggling with certain key pieces. Just he mentioned the analogy of the X-ray industry. Like, when it started, they would X-ray babies all the time. They would just X-ray stuff left and right. They wouldn't do it properly. And so, but over time, if you look at the development of that, it's become safer and safer and safer. And that's just a normal part of an organism that's evolving, basically. So we also need to honor the time and space that we're in, and that we're building still.
Right. And we also have to look at the fact that there are, like, psychedelics in general, like, spiritually, like, for sure don't want us to control them. And so anytime we as humans try to control these medicines, they're like little chaos machines, and they'll throw curveballs at us, and they'll challenge us, and they, you know, make us take a few steps back. But like, to think that we're going to be the ones that are, you know, going to cure the whole world's trauma is like not really realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And in regards to training, I'm curious, like, what's your recommendation for facilitators out there that are getting trained? There's a lot of people that are very like training hungry right now. They're looking for places to go to and develop, and a lot of very well-meaning people are training right now and expanding their skills. And what would you recommend for them in terms of maybe they don't have 5 years or 6 years to go apprentice in the jungle with someone, and yet they want to, you know, start to serve? You know, is it about mentorship and community and moving slowly? What would you recommend to them?
I think yes, and all of that, like mentorship, moving slowly, finding other places that you can practice your skills, volunteering at a community center, like volunteering at a soup kitchen, like showing up and being present with people who are struggling, like, can be really meaningful. And I think it should be part of everyone's integration work. I also think that there are definitely other areas where you should get trained, right? I think that psychedelics, especially for therapists, like psychedelics are going to be 5 to 10% of my practice. The rest of it is being a good therapist. And so go learn how to be a good therapist. Go learn how to be a good coach. Go learn how to be a death doula or a birth doula. Anything. Go take a class in BDSM and kink. Like, you know, anything that is, you know, liminal space, altered state experiences. And like, and find out your own edges. Go to Burning Man. Go to Burning Man. That place will push your edges. It will teach you who you are, right? Like, and go to a sweat lodge, go on a silent meditation retreat. Like, all of these things will give you the internal learning that you'll need to know in the future. And I love that there's these people who, I have a background in hospitality, so I was in hospitality for a decade before I became a therapist. And I have a lot of people who are like, I want to open up a psychedelic retreat center. And I was like, cool. Do you know how to run a retreat center? And they're like, no. And I was like, do you know how to do any sort of mental health or behavioral health care? No. And I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't really seem like you're the right person for the job. Like, where else, right? Or go learn about hospitality and what it takes to open up a retreat center and how hard it is for your first 5 years of running anything.
It's super hard. The retreat space is so hard.
Program is going to have to shift and change, and how much heartbreak you have to, like, it is like birthing a thing. And 90% of them fail in their first 5 years. And so what we're seeing is like just another like economic trend. An economic trend.
Right. Yeah. And then the you know, starting a practice itself is very challenging, but a retreat space is a whole different thing. And even the sort of really well-funded businesses in the space have been failing left and right. I don't think throwing money at anything, especially in this space, is a really good solution. I think it's more about building community and creating spaces of good stewardship, true values and culture, and connection and humbleness, which you speak about here a little bit too around. Well, there's two things. Like, one is the psychedelic exceptionalism. I think part of, like, if you want to be a facilitator, you just focus on facilitator things. But what you're sharing is that just be a good human and connect with people and be present and always be open to receiving insights and teachings, and supporting yourself with people that are going to be saying, hey, you know, I don't think you should have done that, kind of thing. You know, a support space where other people that have more experience than you can tell you in true honesty and transparency. I think that's a big part of doing your own work, right? Is getting the support for that.
it is so hard to give and receive feedback in an effective way. And one of the things that I found in starting Shine is like, I'm now facilitating a whole bunch of really challenging conversations around feedback and repair and community repair. And it is hard work. And also it gets better with practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think practicing with safe people to then expand out to more challenging people is really helpful. And being able to go to your friends and say, hey, this thing you did last week bothered me and I want to talk about it. Because it's like, usually I don't hang on to things. So if something I'm hanging on to, like, hey, that was the wrong thing, then I should have the conversation. And because if I was out of character, if I was out of line or integrity with myself, I would want my friends to tell me that.
I'd love to talk a bit more about that, because I've had the same experience of being that person who saw something that a facilitator did. One of my friends that I didn't like, and I didn't say anything because first of all, it felt challenging for me. That's my own stuff around sharing the truth and kind of pushing on someone's edge a little bit. And I feel like, and with Nectara as well, in terms of, the vetting that we do for our guys, there has been challenging stories where we had to practice like sharing in true honesty and being like, this is what come up, like, what do you think? And having those tough conversations was a big learning for me and Elaine. What do you recommend for facilitators out there in terms of opening up to sharing that feedback? Because I do think it's a very self-regulating space in terms of the facilitators, especially. They're very connected typically in community. They work with each other, they talk to each other. There's a very sort of strong self-accountability. However, there's a ton of sensitivity around sharing the truth and really sharing harm that's been created, because people get so sensitive about their work, and for multiple reasons, of course. But I'd love to hear more about how can facilitators deepen that practice, because I do think it's so essential that we self-police each other and self-support as a community.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I have with some of my community members is, agreements around feedback, and when and how to give it and receive it. And so creating a community that is like, hey, like, let's have a once a month check-in and let's just make sure, right? This is what supervision and consultation groups are for and things like that. But also having almost like an invitation of saying, hey, it would be, I think I would benefit from getting feedback. And so if there's any way that I've been out of line, and usually it's just like the truth that I know that I don't want to tell myself. I think my own medicine practice is very helpful. Also, that kind of does its own work.
Yeah.
And finding people, it's hard to find mentorship. Because psychedelic work, underground work, has been so secretive for so long. And so again, this is like mentorship someplace else, right? Like, it doesn't have to always be in the psychedelic space. This like siloing ourselves into the psychedelic space and only the psychedelic space is the thing that is going to cause the problem. And so, is there another place you can give and receive feedback? Can you take another class someplace? Can you, there's trainings on giving and receiving feedback. And so, like learning around that and then practicing. And I think there is this fear that if you admit that you've done something wrong, that you will be judged for it, because that is oftentimes most of our experiences.
Right.
And so saying to someone, is there anything you'd like to get off your chest? Like, I won't judge you for it. I'll just be here to listen. But you can say unless it's I'm continuing to perpetuate this harm, but I don't think anybody would continue. I don't think anybody would invite that feedback if they were, intentional or malicious. But you can say man, like I had a really challenging session with this client. And like, I don't know if I'm the right facilitator for them.
Yeah.
Like,
And
or things like, wow, I'm really attracted to one of my clients. Like, I don't know what to do with this. But I also feel like I need to name it and talk about it. Or
yeah.
one of my clients is hitting on me and making me feel uncomfortable. And I've set boundaries and now I don't really know what to do. And they're a full fee client. And so I don't want to turn them down. Right. Like there's all of these things. And so just kind of inviting like softer conversation around feedback for practice.
Yeah. And I think that's, as a recovering people pleaser, I can share in full honesty that that's been part of my pattern, especially in the past, around kind of looking at the positive side of things a lot and maybe bypassing the shadow side a bit. And I'm now that I'm older and I'm getting wiser around this. I understand now that the ability to meet uncomfortable moments and to talk about them and to share in openness challenges and really look at them and also listen and attune to someone's feedback builds a lot of trust. Because if you're always chasing the positive side of things, at a core level, you're not fully trustable, basically. And I think that this practice between facilitators can help build more trust for clients and to build more trust in the space in general, which leads to more safety, of course, when people hold containers.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's almost like there's this line of kind of spiritual bypassing or just spiritual belief system, which is the universe will send me the people I'm supposed to be working with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to work with this person, like, because they creep me out. Like, right? It's like there's a space in between there where we're supposed to be.
Right.
And then you end up working with people who you're not actually aligned with because you're not listening to yourself, because you're also needing the money or needing the whatever or wanting the practice. And so what we're finding is people are not making their number one choice. People are making their third or fourth choice of facilitator, of substance,
Mm-hmm.
of financial cost.
Right.
And so really kind of looking at this like matrix, this decision matrix when people are choosing, but also as a facilitator, what is your decision matrix? How many people do you want to facilitate for every week or every month?
Yeah.
Like,
And what gender and what types of people? Yeah.
right. Do you want to work with trauma? Like, here's the thing. I feel like everybody's, because the trauma label is on everything right now, especially in psychedelics. And I was like, but most of you don't want to work with people who have like long-term, like CPTSD stuff. You like
Mm-hmm.
actually want to like give your friends a spiritual experience and like have the same thing that you had. But like that is CPTSD and chronic depression, and like these are hard things to work with that involve a lot of training. And so if you are into psychedelic coaching, like you shouldn't be working with severely mentally ill people or people who have severe mental health diagnoses.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
also therapists don't have legal access yet. And so, right, again, it's like not optimal. And so it's not everybody's first choice. But I also think that more and more trauma therapists and experts in the trauma field are starting to get into the psychedelic field. And I know a lot of people who are like well-respected professionals in the therapy world who tried to get into psychedelics and was like, all of you are crazy and unprofessional and I don't want to work with you, and like left, like fully left the industry. Because they can't find people who are going to hold up the standards of care that they feel would be ethically responsible.
Yeah. So
And
a big,
so we're slowly working on it.
yeah, and being really honest to yourself about what's your capacity. I have a friend that you know, is a bit of a cowboy. He or she
Hmm.
will take a lot of different types of clients, and this person has issues with a certain type of client, but he or she keeps seeing that type of client, and then the feedback from the community is like, I was harmed in that experience. And so the feedback I had for him or her was, you need to filter your clients a bit better. And I think that applies so well to retreat centers as well, which again, the money conversation comes in, and like, of course you have to fill the seats and things, but who are you welcoming into your space? And are you able to actually support that well? But also, like, are you burning yourself out? Because like you said earlier, people are maybe seeing too much clients. And I think there's a chase towards service that also has a dark side to it, like everything else has a dark side to it. Like, you're not actually helping. Like, are you helping yourself to help others? And then also filter people based on full honesty and awareness, which I think community comes in to build awareness around, like, who you should be serving and how many of them. And I think that's a big,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's a big thing in the space.
And how often? I mean, like, I really think that, and I know people who serve medicine, like, especially people who are of indigenous lineage who serve medicine on a fairly regular basis. Like, more so than what I think anybody in the Western medical model would serve.
Mm.
With that being said, I really think that, like, if you're running a psychedelic retreat center, 1 week a month should be a non-medicine integration retreat for your community
Yes.
member and for yourself. Or you should have, there's all these different retreat models, and we can go down a hospitality rabbit hole anytime of looking at things like, the reason, like Club Med, like the Club Med model, like the all-inclusive model versus the a la carte model versus the like ecotourism model, right? There's like all of these different models for retreat centers. And so is it everybody comes for is the turnover on Sunday, or is the turnover on Monday and everybody has to come for 7 days? Or is it every weekend? And what do you do during the weekdays? Is it like, there's like so many different hospitality structures that you could look at of what could be the most successful depending on your location and size. And I think a lot of people who are in this like retreat center space are just like looking more at like mental health care models than they are hospitality models. And like, they're all going to have to shift into, weddings pay the most. So like, you're going to get a wedding buyout and you're going to take it because it's going to be good money. And so really looking at how much money do you need to make and how much rest do you need, and like what that equation can look like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that people need rest, and then the intention around money is a big one as well. And I like to see retreats as sort of this very complex ecosystem where like every single piece of the puzzle ends up affecting the safety of the journeyer. And
Mm-hmm.
through that, like the self-care and the capacity of the staff to be able to deliver and show up in full presence and attunement to what's happening in the space. And like we said earlier, there's a bit of a paradox around wanting to serve people and build a sustainable business and overdoing it. And we've talked a lot about sort of the bigger sets of harm that can happen, around training and lack of support and taking too many people in. But as we've talked about on another call, harm can be created in the smallest of ways. Like you mentioned last time, like using blankets that are hypoallergenic. Like that's a very tiny piece of the equation, nonetheless matters, because if you have someone itching all night during a ceremony, it's not going to be the same experience. And so I'm really interested in exploring the nuances of that, in terms of a retreat center specifically, or even the facilitators, like looking at all the details, right, of like your experience. And it's not just like the deep inner work and the shadow work, but it's the smallest of things as well that I think is very interesting and enriching to look at as well.
Yeah. And this is kind of like, I mean, I'm so glad that I have a degree in hospitality, because I had to like study all the different, like, you know, like varieties of like levels of luxury and like what expectations are, and kind of being able to explore everything from you know, motel models to like Four Seasons models to like a Mon resort model, and like really kind of look at what's been, and like look at what Ritz-Carlton is doing as they are expanding into like cruise, like small vessel cruise ships, but really like helping build a brand. Like that's what I know is really it like for a retreat center, knowing that if I think of X retreat center, I know it's going to be good. I know they're going to have like the best pool towels and like the freshest fruit and the right. Like you want to be able to associate your name with the service that you are providing. And really knowing like the attention to detail, the idea that all spaces should be ready to receive somebody who is in a sensitive space. And so controllable lighting, like controllable temperature, easy access for showers, easy access for washing. Like, you know, what if you cut your, like having things around to be able to attune to comfort. I definitely, there's years ago, I was at a ceremony and somebody made the most beautiful giant platter of fruits and nuts and chocolates. And it was this like beautiful mandala of just like deliciousness. And it was so well received by everybody who was like coming out of ceremony. I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. Or when it's like birthday and you like end ceremony, you go into like, you know, go for food afterwards. And there's just something that's like has care and intentionality and beauty kind of mixed into it. Really makes people feel cared for and held in the space. Yeah. So, if there, you know, if there's this intentionality and this presence and this care and this attention to detail, and like personalization, it just makes people feel so much more held and so much more, cared for when they're in that space.
Which allows them to go deeper in the experience because they feel the nurture and the support and the structure is there in place that is attuned to their needs. And so they know that if something does happen, which invariably does happen, and happens to all of us where we have a challenging experience, then we know that we're going to be held well. And I think that allows us to have even less challenging experiences. Or if we need to go there, we go there willingly, knowing that they care. And
that they are going to show up. Like somebody's going to answer the phone. I think is
that
important.
flows from that flows from the very top, like, you know, of the retreat ecosystem, which is, you know, who founded the company, like who's funding it, like how and you talked about this briefly. I'd love to talk a little bit more about it, but how do they price their services? And that applies to, you know, facilitators, and, you know, do they have a reciprocity model where they give back to something, or they're involved in some nonprofit community efforts? Maybe they're involved in the space as, you know, they're building something else to help support it, and that creates a sphere of safety, or safe enough, I should say. And how transparent are they in their communications, the legal agreements, those type of things. So let's talk a bit more about the pricing piece, because I think that's a really interesting one. There's so much different pricing, from like, you know, $200 or pro bono models to like, you know, the elite $20,000 retreats for executives and stuff, like all of it meeting people in different socioeconomical ways. What's your kind of advice on pricing?
Don't take out a second mortgage to do this work. Don't pay for something that is going to be a burden to you. A lot of ethical facilitators, churches, and retreats have sliding scale models. If you need help, ask for help. Like, you know, I really want to do this. Is there a way? Is there a scholarship? Or do I, like, you know, how do I, you know, get access to this in a way that is not an additional burden to me? But also, I just like people who have disposable income and they're like, hey, let's go do this thing. Great. If you if you have it, amazing. And just like I'll use like, just like, you know, a very wealthy individual would probably not feel comfortable at like a pro bono community circle in the same way that a pro bono community circle vulnerable person would not feel comfortable at a $20,000 retreat. Right? They have different communities. All communities should exist. I think that retreat centers or organizations that are like that, there should be corporate stewardship where they have financial transparency. So whether this is a B Corp or a nonprofit model, or if it is hey, even though we're a private corporation, like we're committed to giving 10% of our profits to plant reciprocity programs. Here are the programs that we support. Here are the things that we're aligned with. Here's the other organizations. These are the people that are on my team. Like, if you're gonna, you know, support these causes, right? Like, we are also a cause, and we are a private business, and you're paying for our services. And also, with the profits that we do make, this is our plan. Or our plan is to expand, and we want to be in 3 or 4 different cities. And so, you know, we're planning on charging enough money so we can build enough equity to make the investment in these other businesses, or run a nonprofit and have all of your finances transparent. But there's a way to have financial transparency in a private business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not that money is a bad thing. It's always the intentions that, you know, flow from the top. And that's why I think like looking at a retreat ecosystem, like looking at the founders first and saying like, why did they get into this business in the first place? That's going to flow all the way down the pyramid, all the way down to the actual journey or experience, who's experiencing this full experience of, you know, having the retreat space online or whatever. And then like having the experience, all the touch points there are signaling something to the journeyer. And as a facilitator, it's the same thing, and how you present yourself and how your agreements sound like how do you collect payments, and what's your sliding scale if you have one, what's your pricing, what's your policies around privacy of data, for example, things of that nature. All influences. So the invitation for the facilitators out there is really to look at all the pieces as something that truly matters and ends up compounding the safety of your container.
Right. And I think that is yeah, I think having that type of transparency is actually good practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really, you know, encourage people who are running these businesses to kind of look at look at how the whole system is run, right? Look at the founders. And I like to say that the system will only get as healthy as whoever is controlling it at the top. And so if the person at the top is not ethical, cutting corners, has inappropriate boundaries, like, the system's going to be that way. And so making sure that the people at the top are also like aligned with you. Are these people that you want to support? Are these people, right? And maybe you don't know. And I always encourage people that in psychedelics, I feel like there's a lot of people that by mistake find themselves in a cult at some point throughout their journey. And so let me just encourage everyone, you can leave at any time. Like, and if you can't leave at any time, like, you might be involved in like a human trafficking ring. But like, also, like, let's be honest, like, you have autonomy. You have free will. If something is happening that is inappropriate, you don't feel safe there, you can get up and leave.
Yeah. And what?
Don't get up and leave in the middle of a ceremony. Like, don't get like leave community, not like immediately leave. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You're
What
playing
do
a
you
song
think?
I don't like. I'm out of here. Like, don't do it like.
Yeah, I actually did leave a ceremony once midway, but anyway, it's another story. But yeah, it was totally a shit show. But anyway, that
Right.
was part of a a center that was just completely out of integrity. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but also like I encourage people if it's not the right setting for you, it's not the right setting for you, and your gut is telling you something.
yeah, so one last question here is, we talked about those challenging situations and how to better set up a space and hold spaces for people. What kind of accountability measures, or I wouldn't say like vetting as well, like vetting and accountability seems like big things in the space. Like, what do you see in the future around holding certain standards basically for the facilitators and retreat teams? Is it going to be sort of like a B Corp model? Is it going to be some sort of community-based review system based on certain standards? Like, what do you see happening? And it could be multiple things.
Oh God, there's so many things, and I feel like my hands are in a lot of pots. But things like in the US, things like the Board of Psychedelic Medicines and Therapies, which I'm a board member of, where we're creating the eligibility and credentialing exam for board certification for psychedelic facilitators, and like APA and the Psychedelic Medicine Association. And so some of these people are already, or North Star, they're creating ethical guidelines. They're kind of like putting things out. Like there will be some sort of like community accountability system or a way to report somebody to the board. It's really hairy. It's challenging work to be able to figure out what accountability might look like. We're also looking at like anonymized reporting systems that could be able to, weed out credible or weed out discredible, like false reports. And so I think we're working on it, and hopefully AI and tech will help us get forward, like move forward on that a little bit quicker, but really trying to come up with ways to have community accountability and also some sort of licensure or certification accountability if there is harm done.
It's a big problem, and I'm glad that you're working on it along with everyone else. And what an exciting adventure! It's a very interesting space to work into, just because of the multitude of different perspectives and lineages and medicines and all those type of things. So I just really want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. And for anyone out there that wants to support a great organization doing important work, shinesupport.org. Erica's doing great work there with her team. What's your greatest wish for the space?
What's my greatest wish for the space? I hope we don't blow ourselves up.
It's a good one.
Wow. Like, let me try that again. My greatest wish for the space would be that we move through everything with compassion and grace. We don't know how things are going to turn out. We don't know what legal status is going to happen. We don't know what access or safety is going to look like in the future. And still, I hope that we continue to move through the space with like grace, compassion, understanding, flexibility, creativity, and hope.
Yeah, beautiful. And connection to each other, because like I said, I don't think anyone has all the answers, and connecting with others that are like aligned with your values, and even if they're not maybe aligned with values, learning from that too, and having those tough conversations. And connection, that's what the medicines are teaching us to, is to break the silos and work together to do this. And I think that's a beautiful invitation. So thank you so much, Erica, for your insights, and I'm sure we can have 5 more podcasts around these topics, but I hope that this was useful for people out there.
May this be the first of many.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks.